Neha and Rohan found the cottage in late spring. It was small and rather far from the town. Willow Lane was quiet, almost too quiet sometimes. Tall trees lined the lane, their branches reaching. They looked like old men, whispering secrets to the wind. The cottage itself was painted a pale yellow, now faded. It had a porch that sagged a little on one side. Neha thought it had character, a story to tell. Rohan saw the low price and the work they could do together. They were newlyweds, after all. Building a life from scratch, this old house would be their first real home, a place for their dreams. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust and old wood. Sunlight struggled to push through the grimy window panes. The rooms were small and the ceilings were low. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting. Neha shivered just for a moment, then smiled at Rohan. He was already measuring a wall, planning where the sofa would go. She loved his optimism, his practical nature. It balanced her own tendency to feel things too deeply. She told herself the shiver was just a draft, nothing more. This was their adventure, their beginning, and it would be wonderful, she insisted silently to the quiet rooms. They spent the first few days cleaning. Dust motes danced in the weak sunbeams. Cobwebs clung to every corner like delicate grey lace. The floors creaked with every step they took, a constant reminder of the house's age. Rohan whistled as he worked, his cheerfulness echoing slightly in the empty spaces. Neha scrubbed and polished, trying to chase away the gloom. She found an old, faded photograph tucked behind a loose floorboard. It showed a family she did not recognize, their faces stern, unsmiling. She quickly put it away, a faint unease prickling at the back of her neck. The house held many old things, she reasoned. The previous owners had left some furniture behind, old heavy pieces draped in white sheets. They looked like ghosts in the dim light. Neha and Rohan decided to remove most of it. They wanted to fill the cottage with their own things, bright and new. Yet a part of Neha felt a strange reluctance to disturb the house too much. It was as if the cottage preferred its solitude, its memories undisturbed. She pushed the thought away. It was just an old house, she told herself firmly. An old house that would soon be filled with their laughter, their love, their life. It started in the small bedroom upstairs, the room they had chosen for themselves. The wallpaper was a pattern of faded roses, once perhaps cheerful. Now the roses looked sad, their petals drooping. Neha noticed it first. A small bubble near the window, the paper was lifting just a little. It was an old house, she thought. Old houses had peeling wallpaper. She mentioned it to Rohan casually one evening. He glanced at it, then shrugged. "We can fix that," he said. "A bit of paste, or we can repaper the whole room eventually. Make it ours." He was practical, always practical. But the next morning the peel was larger. It had spread overnight like a slow, creeping tide. The edges curled away from the wall, revealing a darker patch of plaster underneath. Neha felt a small knot of unease tighten in her stomach. It was strange, the way it had grown so quickly. She touched the edge of the paper. It felt damp and slightly brittle. Rohan was already downstairs making coffee, the sounds of his morning routine a comfort. She tried to shake off the feeling. It was just damp, she reasoned. The house was old, probably not well maintained for years before they bought it. She smoothed the paper back against the wall. It did not stick. It sprang away again, as if resisting her touch. Neha frowned. She pressed it harder, holding it for a long moment. When she let go, it slowly, stubbornly curled back. It felt almost deliberate, a small act of defiance from the house itself. She told herself she was being foolish. Wallpaper did not have intentions. It was inanimate, just paper and paste. But the unease lingered, a cold whisper in the quiet room. The faded roses on the wall seemed to watch her with their muted, sorrowful eyes. Rohan saw it again that evening. "Still peeling, huh?" he said, his voice unconcerned. "We'll add it to the list of weekend projects." He kissed her forehead and went to check on a leaky tap in the kitchen. Neha stayed in the bedroom staring at the wallpaper. The patch was definitely wider now. It was as if something was pushing it from behind. Something unseen, within the walls. She felt a sudden urge to pull it all off, to see what lay beneath, but a deeper, colder feeling held her back. A sense of not wanting to know, of being afraid of what she might find. A few days passed. The peeling in the bedroom worsened. Other spots began to appear, small blisters on the surface of the tired roses. Neha found herself constantly checking the walls, her eyes drawn to the imperfections. Rohan remained unbothered, busy with his job and the more pressing repairs the cottage demanded. He patched the roof, fixed the plumbing, and talked about painting the kitchen a bright sunny yellow. He did not seem to notice Neha's growing preoccupation with the wallpaper, or if he did, he said nothing, perhaps attributing it to the stress of moving and settling into a new, albeit old, place. One afternoon, while Rohan was at work, Neha stood before the largest peel. The exposed plaster underneath was dark, almost grey. She reached out a hesitant finger and touched it. It was cold, colder than the rest of the wall. And it was not smooth. There were faint lines, indentations in the plaster. At first she thought they were just cracks, the natural settling of an old structure, but as she looked closer, squinting in the poor light, she saw a pattern, or rather, the suggestion of a pattern. The lines were too regular to be accidental cracks in the old wall. She ran her fingers over them. They felt like shallow scratches, almost invisible. Were they old pencil marks? Perhaps a child had drawn on the wall long ago, before this layer of wallpaper was applied. That seemed plausible, a harmless explanation. Yet, the feeling of unease did not leave her. It deepened, coiling in her stomach like a cold snake. The marks were faint, yes, but there was something about their arrangement that felt unsettling. Not like a child's innocent drawing. They seemed more deliberate, more intentional than that. She could not quite decipher them yet. That evening she tried to show Rohan. "Look," she said, her voice a little breathless. "There are marks under here." Rohan leaned in, peered at the wall for a moment. Looks like old scribbles," he said, straightening up. "Probably from when the house was built. Don't worry about it, love. We'll cover it up when we repaper." He smiled, trying to reassure her, but Neha saw no reassurance in his easy dismissal. He didn't see what she saw, or perhaps he didn't feel what she felt. A growing certainty that these were not just any old marks on an old wall. The next day, the wallpaper in the corner of the bedroom had peeled away significantly. A large ragged sheet of it hung limply, exposing a wider area of the plaster beneath. Neha approached it with a mixture of dread and reluctant curiosity. The morning light, weak as it was, fell directly on the exposed section, and now there was no mistaking them. The faint lines she had seen before were clearer here, deeper. They were not scribbles, they were marks, gouges in the plaster. Some looked like long, thin scratches, grouped in 3s or 4s, like claw marks. Animal claws, perhaps, or something else. Her breath caught in her throat. Beside the claw-like marks there were other symbols, strange angular shapes she did not recognize. They were not letters from any alphabet she knew. They were sharp and somehow menacing, even in their crudeness. They looked ancient and forbidden. A shiver traced its way down her spine, cold and sharp. This was not the work of a child. This was something else entirely, something that made the small hairs on her arms stand on end. The faded roses on the remaining wallpaper seemed to mock her, their silent, sad faces knowing more than they let on. She backed away from the wall slowly. Her heart was pounding in her chest, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The room suddenly felt colder, the air heavier. The silence of the cottage pressed in on her, no longer peaceful but suffocating. She wanted to run, to leave this room, this house, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. She had to tell Rohan he had to see this. He couldn't dismiss this as mere scribbles. This was tangible, undeniable. The evidence was right there, etched into the very bones of their new home, a silent testament to some unknown past. When Rohan came home, she pulled him upstairs immediately. "You have to look," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. He followed her, a questioning look on his face. When he saw the wall, his expression changed. The easy smile vanished. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. He touched the marks, his fingers tracing the deep gouges. "What is this?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. "These aren't just old marks." For the first time, Neha saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. Fear, she realized, was a shared language finally understood between them. That night, Neha could not sleep. Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep. Every rustle of leaves outside the window seemed like a whisper. Rohan slept beside her, his breathing even, but Neha lay awake, staring into the darkness. The images of the claw marks and symbols danced behind her eyelids. She kept thinking about what could have made them. What kind of creature, what kind of person would carve such things into a wall? The air in the bedroom felt oppressive, charged with an unseen presence. She imagined eyes watching her from the shadows, from the corners of the room where the darkness was deepest. She finally drifted into a fitful, uneasy sleep, only to be jolted awake by a nightmare. In her dream, she was trapped within the walls of the cottage. She could hear scratching sounds all around her, getting closer. Long, sharp claws were tearing at the plaster, trying to reach her. She could feel the vibrations, smell the dust. She woke up with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rohan stirred beside her, mumbling in his sleep. The room was dark, silent, but the terror of the dream clung to her like a shroud. It felt so real, so vivid. The next morning they examined the wall again. The area of exposed plaster seemed even larger, or perhaps it was just their heightened awareness. Rohan, now thoroughly unsettled, brought a flashlight. He shone its bright beam onto the marks. In the harsh light, they looked even more disturbing. Some of the gouges were very deep, as if made with considerable force. And then Neha saw it, a faint, dark stain within one of the deepest claw marks. It was reddish brown. It looked like old blood. Her stomach churned. Rohan saw it too. He said nothing, but his face paled. The discovery of the stain changed everything. It was no longer just strange marks on a wall. It was evidence of something violent, something terrible. The house was not just old and neglected. It was wounded. It held a dark secret, a painful memory etched into its very structure. Neha felt a profound sense of dread. They were living in a place where something awful had happened, and the house seemed to be trying to tell them about it, peeling back its layers one by one, revealing its trauma. The faded roses on the wallpaper seemed to weep. The days that followed were filled with a growing tension. The house no longer felt like their own. It felt like they were intruders, trespassers in a place that did not want them. Strange things began to happen, small at first, then more frequent. Doors would creak open slowly, even when there was no draft. They would hear faint scratching sounds from within the walls, especially at night, echoing Neha's nightmare. Cold spots would appear suddenly in rooms, making them shiver despite the mild autumn weather. Objects they were sure they had left in one place would be found in another, slightly moved. Neha became convinced they were being watched. She would catch fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye. The portraits of the stern-faced family she had found seemed to follow her with their gaze. The faded roses on the wallpaper felt like 1,000 silent eyes, observing her every move. Rohan, though trying to remain rational, was also affected. He became quieter, his usual cheerfulness subdued. He started locking the doors more carefully, checking the windows before they went to bed. He suggested they spend less time in the bedroom with the marked wall, perhaps even sleep downstairs on the sofa. The wallpaper continued its relentless peel. It was no longer confined to the bedroom. Small patches began to appear in the hallway, then in the living room. It was as if the house was shedding its skin, slowly revealing more and more of its hidden torment. The process seemed to accelerate, the paper curling away with an almost eager persistence. Neha found herself talking to the house in hushed whispers, asking it what it wanted, what it was trying to show them. She received no answer, only the continued silence, punctuated by the unsettling creaks and scratches from within its depths. One evening, as they sat in the living room trying to read, a large piece of wallpaper in the hallway suddenly detached itself from the wall. It fell to the floor with a soft sighing sound. Both Neha and Rohan jumped. They stared at the newly exposed patch of plaster. More marks, more symbols. They were spreading throughout the house. It was as if an unseen hand was methodically stripping the walls, forcing them to confront the darkness that lay beneath. The cottage was no longer a passive container of secrets. It was an active participant in their unfolding nightmare, its silence now feeling malevolent. The night was unnaturally still. No wind rustled the leaves outside, no distant sounds of traffic reached Willow Lane. Inside the cottage, Neha and Rohan lay tense in their bed, sleep eluding them. The air was cold and heavy with an unspoken dread. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a soft, tearing sound coming from the bedroom wall. It was the wallpaper, but this time it was different. It wasn't just a small section peeling. It sounded like a large sheet being ripped away, slowly, deliberately. Neha clutched Rohan's arm, her nails digging into his skin. They lay frozen, listening. The tearing sound continued methodically for what felt like an eternity. Rip, pause, rip, pause. It was as if invisible hands were at work, carefully undressing the wall. Rohan fumbled for the flashlight on the bedside table, his hand shaking. He switched it on, aiming the beam towards the source of the sound. A significant portion of the wallpaper opposite their bed had fallen away, revealing a large expanse of the marked plaster. The faded roses lay in a heap on the floor like discarded funeral flowers. The newly exposed marks glowed faintly in the flashlight's beam. The symbols were denser here, more complex, the claw marks deeper, angrier. It was a tapestry of old pain, a mural of forgotten suffering. As they stared, horrified, another section of wallpaper, right beside the first, began to tremble. It bulged outwards, then slowly, impossibly, peeled itself away from the plaster. It detached itself with a sigh, falling silently to join its companion on the floor. There was no draft, no discernible reason for it to happen. It was as if the wall itself was alive, actively choosing to reveal its secrets to them in the dead of night. Neha felt a scream building in her throat, but it died before it could escape. She could only stare wide-eyed at the unfolding horror. The wall was communicating in the only way it knew how. It was showing them its wounds, its history. The silence that followed the fall of the second piece of wallpaper was more terrifying than the sound itself. It was a silence filled with expectancy, as if the house was waiting for their reaction, waiting for them to understand the true extent of the darkness it held within its ancient decaying structure. Rohan slowly got out of bed, the flashlight beam trembling in his hand. Neha followed, her legs unsteady. They approached the wall, drawn by a horrible fascination. The newly exposed plaster was covered in the same disturbing claw marks and angular symbols they had seen before, but there was something new, something that made Neha's blood run cold. In the very center of the largest exposed section, amidst the chaotic scratches, were letters, not the strange symbols, but letters from their own alphabet, crudely carved into the plaster, deep and sharp. Rohan moved the flashlight closer, his breath hitching. The letters formed words, and the words formed names. Their names, Neharohan. Etched into the wall as if by a desperate clawed hand. Beneath their names another word, stark and terrifying, Stay. Or perhaps it was a command, a warning. The carving was rough, filled with a frantic energy. It looked as though it had been done recently, yet the plaster around it was ancient, stained. How was this possible? Who could have done this? The question hung in the cold air, unanswered and unanswerable. Neha reached out a trembling hand, her fingers tracing the letters of her own name. They felt sharp, malevolent. A wave of nausea washed over her. This was not just an old haunting. This was personal. The house knew them. It had marked them, claimed them. The realization was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. All the small, unsettling occurrences, the peeling wallpaper, the marks, it had all been leading to this terrible, intimate revelation. The cottage was not just haunted. It was actively engaging with them, drawing them into its dark narrative. Rohan grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We have to leave," he whispered, his voice hoarse with terror. Now. There was no more discussion, no more attempts at rational explanation. The evidence was undeniable, carved into the very fabric of the house. Their names, a chilling invitation or a dire threat. The cottage had revealed its heart, and it was a heart full of darkness, a darkness that now seemed to be reaching out specifically for them. The faded roses on the remaining wallpaper seemed to wilt further, their sorrow complete. The house had spoken its truth. They fled that night. They did not pack. They did not look back. They drove until the sun began to rise, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the little cottage on Willow Lane. The memory of their names, gouged into the ancient plaster, was seared into their minds. They found a small, modern apartment in a busy part of a new city. It was clean, bright, and utterly devoid of character. There was no peeling wallpaper, no strange marks, no oppressive silence, just the hum of traffic and the sounds of everyday life. For a while they felt safe, or at least safer. Rohan tried to move on. He focused on his work, on creating a sense of normalcy. He rarely spoke of the cottage, and when he did, it was with a forced detachment, as if recalling a bad dream. But Neha could not forget. The horror of that last night replayed in her mind, the claw marks, the symbols, their names. She found herself staring at blank walls, half expecting them to ripple and peel. She slept poorly, plagued by nightmares of scratching sounds and dark, watching eyes. The fear had followed her, a shadow she could not shake off. Weeks turned into months. The new apartment remained sterile, impersonal. One afternoon, Neha was alone, staring at the plain white wall in their new living room. Her fingers idly traced patterns on the smooth surface. She looked down at her hand. Her fingernails were tracing a familiar angular symbol, one of the strange etchings from the cottage wall. She snatched her hand back as if burned. Where had that come from? She hadn't consciously drawn it then. She noticed the faint, almost invisible scratches on the pristine white paint. Marks she had made without realizing. A cold dread seeped into her. The cottage was far away, but its influence lingered. Or perhaps it was not the cottage itself, but something it had awakened, something that was now a part of her. She looked at her own hands, at her fingernails. They seemed sharper somehow. The unseen scar left by the house was not on its walls, but within her. The horror was not just a place, it was a seed planted deep inside, waiting for its own time to peel back the layers of her sanity. The nightmare, she realized with dawning terror, was far from over. It had merely changed its address.